Excellent. Again, thank you so much for being here for Bay Area Agile Coaching Circles. I want to introduce Amy Dexter. I am so excited. Amy Dexter, PhD. She has a background in psychology. She is right now transitioning to project management and agile coaching from being a professor. And that is actually how we met. We met in Chrism's meetup, Scrum Professionals, which is an amazing group. They do guest speakers, they have office hours every Monday. Amy and I met in there and we really connected over Agile, over being a Scrum Master, over our challenges. And I'm so thrilled that she wanted to come and speak on this topic of equity and inclusion, because I feel like, especially now, we cannot talk about this enough. We do not talk about this enough. So I'm really glad that we're here on this topic, having this conversation. So with that, Amy, I will turn it over to you.
Right. Let me figure out how to share my screen.
At the top of the screen,
There you
there's a
go.
little
Gotcha.
computer. Cool.
You are sharing your screen. Okay, so you guys can see my screen now.
Yes.
Lovely. All right. So in this format, I can't see you, so I'm gonna rely on Season to let me know if you can't see me anymore, or if somebody has a question as we're going through. So stop me if something's not making sense, but otherwise I'm just gonna move on through. Okay?
Sounds good.
So I wanted to thank you guys all for taking this time. Again, as Susan said, this is so much as Zoom all the time now. So dedicating a little bit of your life to a little bit more of your life to being on video conference is a big thing. So we're going to talk today about creating and sustaining a culture of equity and inclusion. And before we get too far into this, I wanted to address a question some people may have been thinking as they saw that title, creating and sustaining a culture of equity and inclusion. In a lot of business realms right now, folks are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I have dropped the diversity from that title, and I did it on purpose. Some of this is because my background in academia, I am nitpicky about words. Words and which ones you choose mean a lot. But there's also a way that as groups of people use words, their meaning starts to change. And language is kind of a fluid thing. So diversity is a word I have some problems with. Partially because we tend to make diversity into individuals. The infamous diversity hire, right? And I think this is at odds with the idea of equity and inclusion, because if diversity is one person added to a team, or diversity is one person's job on a team, then we're already failing at equity and inclusion, right? Merriam-Webster, diversity is the condition of having or being composed of different elements. So diversity is not an individual. Diversity is the condition of a group, right? It is not one person added to a group. It is not one person's job. It is all our job. Otherwise, we're not going to make a space that's safe and going to be sustaining that diversity. Okay. So The next thing I wanted to do is to explore the diversity that we have here, give folks a chance to introduce themselves and know each other, um, and asking where's the diversity that we have in this Blue Jeans meetup right now. Um, we tend to think of diversity in terms of age and race and gender and sexual orientation and these kinds of boxes you might tick off on a form. But I would like us to think about diversity a little bit more broadly, especially as we are doing these introductions. So I'm going to ask you to, in your breakout rooms, which we'll go to in a second, to introduce yourselves and share what is your favorite comfort food. What feels like comfort food for you? For me, growing up here in Southern California, comfort food is nachos. Nachos are my comfort food. Long, hard day at work, just went on a really good run. I get home, I want my nachos. That's my comfort food. The next thing I'm going to ask for you to share in your breakout room is what does your community do? How do they celebrate the big things, big life events? A baby's born, somebody passes away, other big milestones. You get a job, folks get married. What do you do? In my community nowadays, my family, you post it on social media, and then people give you casseroles. I don't know exactly where the casseroles happened. I don't know how to track that in my particular family history, but casseroles. You have a baby, you get casseroles. Somebody dies, you get casseroles. Casseroles. That's how we handle things. So with that, if you guys could, in your breakout rooms, we'll give you about 5 minutes to introduce yourselves, share a comfort food, and then some aspect of how your community celebrates big events. Right.
So I'm gonna
And
divide us all into breakout rooms. Most of them have 3 people, but there is one with 4 people. As Amy said, it's 5 minutes, so it's gonna go by super, super quick. I'll set a timer on my end and bring us back after 5 minutes, and you'll get a 10-second warning before you come back into the main room. Any questions before we go off and greet each other? And again, you may have to manually unmute yourself because you were automatically muted when you joined. So be sure to click on the microphone or hit the letter M as in mute to unmute and speak. And I will start our breakout rooms now, and it will send you off. See you soon.
so, what the talking about what our favorite foods are or what our communities do to mark big life events gets us to talking about and thinking about who our in-groups are, right? And people make groups. It's part of how our brains work. We categorize things. We categorize other people. We categorize ourselves as a way of making sense of our life. It's a tool that we use to navigate our daily life. So we use these categories to make sense of how we fit in the world, to understand where we belong, understand our relationships to other people, and as guidelines for interacting with other folks. In some ways, these in-group experiences, knowing who our groups are and grouping folks, those folks are doctors, those folks are lawyers, those folks are teachers, right? It makes sense. It's a helpful tool. On the other hand, there are some problems with this tool. So grouping tends to minimize the differences that we are aware of within people in a group. How many of you guys have ever heard somebody say, all millennials are the same? That's like the biggest age cohort. That's huge. And that's a really broad statement, right? But if we're talking about folks as a group, it's easy to think of them as similar. right? On the other hand, we also tend to maximize differences between groups. You may have heard of this book, Men Are From Mars, or Women Are from Venus, Men Are from Mars. Men Are from Mars. I don't know which one goes first. I clearly haven't read the book. Oops. Um, um, but this is again part of how our brain works. The categorizing helps us in a lot of ways to understand our world and to move around in it. It also, like most tools, has some limitations, right? And so we're going to talk about those in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion in this talk. As a friend, Matt Cahill says sometimes, if you have a brain, you have bias. So this grouping that we do inherently is part of the biases that can be problems for our teams. Okay, so we also have out-group experiences. So we talked about in-group experiences, experiences that bring us closer or make us feel closer to folks that have those things in common. We also have out-group experiences. One of my out-group experiences that has shaped me the most has been growing up going to magnet schools in Southern California. Magnet schools were in the a while ago years, I'm not going to say, designed to integrate the public schools by providing special programs in lower income parts of town and busing middle and upper class kids into those schools. So it what has been called reverse busing, but the idea was to have more integrated schools. As a result, I was one of about 10% in my junior high of Anglo folks. And there were times when that didn't bother me much, and there were times when that was really hard. At one point, somebody told me, by the time you graduate high school, we are going to make you Latina. And I was so proud. I was so excited to someday get to be Latina. There was also a guy for a while who would run around and slap me and then run away. Because on really, really pale skin, you can see the hand mark, right? It was not great to have that out-group experience. On the other hand, I'd like to point out that it was an out-group experience that didn't follow me home. So there are systems in which some groups, local minority, like I was in my junior high, I got an insight on what it means to be an out-group member, right? To be the only one from your particular background. But I still, as a white, middle class, highly educated person of highly educated parents, had a lot of privilege that I carried with me, whether I was a local minority or so I would like us all, chat feels a little bit safer for this. And like Season said, you can use her as a intermediary to keep your chat anonymous. But if you would take a moment and share an experience that you had of being an out-group member, being the only one from your background, being a minority or an outsider. You can also unmute and share that verbally if that's comfortable. Just wait a minute or two. I can't see chat, Season, so if you want to read those, if any are coming up.
Yeah, we've got attending POC events. We have
Mm.
being a nerd in junior high and high school. I'm typing my experience, which was growing up in the South as a pale, smart redhead. You're not from around here. We
Mhm.
have a youngster of German culture, heritage in a majority Danish society. Growing up Chinese American in a small town where there were very few people of color. And then going to a Black church when not being Black, attending LGBT events. They're all really good examples. Appreciate everyone sharing. Being the only Jewish family in a small town.
Mm. Yeah, so we have all had some access, I would wager, to an experience where we were the only one. Um, and I'm going to touch back in on why it's important to be aware of these less wonderful, not always so fun experiences as well. Okay, so like I said, that tendency of the human brain to categorize stuff, including people, um, is part of what I call the box problem. And because we tend to think about people as fitting in one group, and then we don't see the diversity of who they are and what they bring. On the other hand, we're all part of lots of groups: age, race, gender, ability, just some of them, right? Um, the context we're in, so what is going on around us, is going to affect which of these group memberships we are most aware of, and it also is going to influence our behavior. So if I am leading, actually, this happened to me. I taught a stats class, and I had a peer come in to review my teaching, and I, as a female teaching stats class, the room changed dramatically when this large, older male colleague came in to evaluate my teaching. And the reviews that I got as a teacher were very, very gendered when he did that evaluation. I should have followed up and had a woman come in and evaluate me and see if the reviews from the students would have been different. Um, but I was real nervous because of I am aware of stereotypes that we have about gender and math, and statistics is math. And that brings us to the point of stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is a phenomenon we found a bunch in social psychology, where knowing that other people have a stereotype about your group, just knowing that they have this belief about your group, will tends to up your nerves about your performance, even if it's something that you are really expert at, you've done a ton, you're going to be more nervous about it. Another way of thinking about it is it's cognitive load. There's more on your brain because you're not only thinking about this teaching statistics that you're doing, you're also thinking about what is this other person thinking about me teaching statistics, right? And it results in people doing less well, performing less well, even when they're experts at what they're doing, right? So we put people in these groups, we categorize them, and these categories tend to influence our behavior. If we're thinking about this in terms of our agile groups, we are hurting our behavior, our performance, by the ways that we are grouping people, potentially. Okay. We also know that how much power you have in a situation, or how much power your group has in a situation, influences how likely you are to be aware of that group membership. So folks from really privileged backgrounds are often see that group experience as normal, right? Um, I have lots of friends who've been to lots of school, and I have been to lots of school. And so it is easy for me to forget that not a lot of people have been to a lot of school like I have. It is a privilege to have been through, oh man, 12 years post high school of education. Um, And not everyone gets to do that, but I forget that that's not an everyone experience because it is a privileged thing that I can go around the world and not assume and assume that other people have my same background. The other thing to think about with these categories that we set up is that you are likely to have the biggest tension between groups when you have what we call relative deprivation, where you can see that somebody else is getting more. If we had dog people, right, folks who love their dogs and folks who love cats, these are often seen as two separate groups, which is bonkers to me. Can't love both. Anyway, all things furry are wonderful. If we have a bunch of treats for the dog owners, but no treats, pet treats for the cat owners are really going to begin to dislike those dog owners. And I have this picture here of a neighborhood in Brazil, favela. So very, very, very poor on, is it your left side? And right next to it, just on the other side of a wall, very affluent. That is a recipe for a lot of conflict between those two groups. Okay, so you may be thinking at this point, okay, cool. So our brains have this tool. We use it all the time. It can give us problems. What do we do with this? Now what? Right? So I've got two ways of dealing with this, and one is a quick fix, and one is a little bit more in depth, harder, but it's better. Don't you know? That's always how it works, right? So the quick fix, because our brains are so into our grouping and categorizing things, one of the tricks we can play on ourselves is to change the reference group. Change what we are paying attention to in terms of our group memberships. Because, like I said before, we all have lots of memberships, age, gender, race, right? We're lots of groups that we're a part of. So just on the screen right now, if you're just looking, what groups are you thinking that we're talking about here with these two pictures? You can unmute and call it out.
In
Male,
chat,
female.
there's male, female, happy, unhappy, hair, no hair.
Happy, unhappy, yep. Cool. Okay. So,
Old,
old or young, or both just old?
both older.
We can use this tendency to group to influence which groups we're paying attention to. One of the ways of manipulating that is what we are seeing, right? So I have shown you these two pictures. There are some aspects of these two faces that are more noticeable, more salient, we would say, more readily apparent, right, than others. We can also talk to individuals within groups and talk about how good a fit they are with an archetype of this group, right? So we had said this is male and female. We could say, oh yes, you are so male-like. You are so unhappy-like. You are so happy-like. Whatever it is to manipulate that we're thinking more about that aspect. Or we could just say they both look like dogs. You are more poodle-like, and this guy is definitely one of the bulldog people.
Amy, I know you can't see everyone, but I just wanted to call out that there's a lot of laughter going on.
Right, you guys didn't expect that reference group. So we could, by showing changing what's accessible as categories to choose from, and in convincing folks that they fit real well with one category or another, influence them to think, okay, this is not about male, female, this is about bulldog or poodle, right? On the other hand, if I showed you the people and their dogs to begin with, some of you would still have thought male, female, happy, sad, right? There's still such a pull to these core categories that we use over and over and over and over and over, and we have such a habit of using to organize our worlds: black, white, rich, poor, male, female, right? Not that these are, but we tend to binaryize things too, which doesn't work either. But um, it, those existing biases are going to are hard to combat. So quick fix, we can change the reference group, but it doesn't always work so well. Another way that we can do this, and changing the reference group, is similar, but has a different kind of fallback. And this is using an idea from a guy named Tajfel, who found that if he randomly selected people and said, okay, this half the room, you are the red group. This half the room, you are the blue group. You are going to compete in a card game against each other. And it's a totally random game. It took no skill. It was just bunko or something that wasn't hard to win, right? He found that quite quickly, each of the groups created an identity for their group. Oh, well, we are blue, and us blue folks, we are really, really good at this, and we work really hard, and we're really honest, and we have really good values. I don't know about those red groups, those folks over there. Even though everyone in the room saw that it was completely random to begin with, right? They forgot that part. They didn't pay attention to that part because they were so inherently locked into this is my group. Well, we can do that as a way to break folks away from thinking about some of these biases, right? We can create a different outgroup. You can say, well, we are all on our team, on Team Dolby, we are working on, and we are definitely not this other team over there that is our competitor, right? And we are building a group, and we are so our team and not this other company, right? The only problem with that is that if you are, so competition does create group cohesion, but competition also makes it harder for you to learn from other groups, right? I have this picture here of my niece, who's awesome, so I can tell you that my niece is awesome. But she is working on a robotics team. And this year, because of COVID, they didn't have that many people to compete in their robotics competition because not many groups were working together. And there are only two groups, and her group didn't win, but they were really excited because there was a lot of cross talk and a lot of folks helping each other out across groups, right? If you build group cohesion and inclusion and break down biases within your group by making yourselves not the other group, you have lost the opportunity for that cross-fertilization with the other group, right? It's much harder to collaborate or learn from somebody else that you've just made the out group. So this fix has a cost. All right, now we've come to the strong way forward that's harder. Okay? And so the strong way forward is an idea that, excuse me? Okay, I thought I heard something. Sorry about that. A strong idea or that is called intersectionality. And this is the idea that we have all these group memberships. You've seen these top two bullet points before. We're part of many groups, and those groups predict what we're aware of, influence our behavior. All of these are meaningful group memberships, but that doesn't mean that you can say, okay, well, all folks who identify as woman have a woman experience. I'll let folks who identify as Gen X have a Gen X experience. All folks who identify as Asian have an Asian experience, right? Um, because the intersections of these different identities, these different group memberships, mean that it is different to be a white woman than it is to be a Latina woman. It is different to be a white woman than it is to be a black woman. It is different to be someone who identifies as non-binary and is white, or non-binary and is Native American. Right? These are different experiences. Right? So why is this a strong way to build past and to work past these biases? Well, I would argue because these groups intersect in ways that give us all the opportunity at some point in our life to have understood what it means to be the outgroup, right? So if we have understood what it is to be the outgroup, we have the opportunity to work together to make things equitable, right? You see this cartoon here where the circle is saying, if you want to make it through, just be yourself. Well, that square, I think it is, and triangle on the other side of the wall, they have different experiences of being the outgroup, but they can build a coalition. They have some solidarity potential there because they are both held down by the same, their same wall, literally. So this intersectionality gives us the opportunity to step into a perspective taking and be a better ally for folks who are from different groups. Okay. One of my favorite quotes on this is from Audre Lorde, and she says, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." Again, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. So we may be outgroups for different reasons. There may be different kinds of biases against us, but we're all kind of in this together. We're not all going to be doing our best, making our best teams, living our best lives until we are all free of this, the bias. Okay, so the insight into experiences of other groups allows for coalition building. This is particularly important for focusing on our outgroup experiences. Okay, so I said that this way was harder. This way is harder. Um, in order to do this perspective taking, in order to build these coalitions, we need a lot of emotional intelligence. We need empathy. We need a ton of courage. We have to be aware of our own emotions, be able to self-reflect and say, okay, this is really scary. Where is this coming? Where is this coming from? I'm really pissed off. Where is that coming from? We need psychological safety, and we need it to be safe in a lot of ways, not just psychologically. We also need humility because we're going to need to correct and admit that we're wrong and try again and say, I tried to see your perspective. Let me understand so that I can be a better ally, right? This is hard. This is not only remembering those times when you were the minority, the outgroup person, but kind of sitting with that and looking for how you can be of the best ally to put folks who are sitting in that. Also, you'll see on the very bottom there is a web site for a webinar next week on removing the power boundaries in DEI, where a friend of mine, Teresa Quinlan, is going to talk about just this, emotional intelligence and building diversity, equity, and inclusion in our groups, our companies. Okay, so mostly I've talked about the ways our brains work as individuals, how this pans out in our interactions, I want to give you a little bit, just one slide here, on how we might see this in our organizations. So a great group called Equity in the Center came up with a research-based report called Awake to Woke to Work. The website for them, equityinthecenter.org. And their basic three-step process is awareness, so ensuring that your organization is representative. This is through hiring, training, and promoting. So don't just get the folks in the room, get them in the room, make sure they are getting trained and promoted to positions of power and decision making. Building, and the building is about making safe space for all the voices that are there, make continuous discussions of equity through behaviors, practices, and policies. And then lastly, integration. And this is the equity lens is part of everything we do. This is applying inspect and adapt to organizational equity. So we're always looking at how are we doing? How can we get better? Okay. Almost done. One last thing I'm going to ask for you guys to do something with this. Okay, so I'm going to challenge you to take a step to make it so that your groups, whether this is work or outside of work, are a little bit more equitable, a little bit more inclusive. And I'm going to give you a couple different ways we can do this. So, personal way, examine your own biases. How are your behaviors supporting inequity or exclusion? And I notice I say how are, not are, right? And this is because we live in a system that tends to perpetuate our habits, tends to perpetuate status quo. So it's really easy, even if we don't intend to support existing systems that are unequal and exclusive, right? So what we can do as individuals is say, okay, where am I being a part of that? How can I opt out? Next one, this is a level 2 difficulty, is interpersonal. And this one's going to relate to Agile coaches real well because we are working with teams so often. But invite and make space for marginalized voices. Who's talking most of the time? Who's not? Let's notice and make sure to make space for the folks who aren't being heard all the time. Another one that I've had some conversations with folks about recently is when something is said that puts somebody in the outgroup, right? When there's something aggressive, unjust, racist, sexist, whatever said or done, act to promote the safety of all the people there, educate, why was this painful, why was this hurtful, what are our rules or norms, commitments, and then restore the community. So let's try to come back to a place where we can all work together again. Let's talk about how we can move past this hurt. That's hard leadership, but that's real important leadership. Okay, and then last, and this is maybe a level 3 difficulty. At an organizational level, you can identify who are the equity champions in positions of power. Who are your leaders in your organization, in your company, in your group that you can get on your side to make sure that these norms about equity and inclusion are priorities. And then also look at the numbers that you have for your organization. Who do you hire? Who do you promote? How does your compensation look? What do those numbers say about equity and inclusion? All right. And I have a ton of questions and a bunch of resources for following up. I feel like I just scratched the surface on a lot of stuff today. So I wanted to give you guys further stuff you could do or further places you could go to learn more. Um, what questions do you have?
Not a question, but I wanted to call out Paula's chat. She said that you
Mm,
can ask when you make changes or look at your systems, who does this benefit? Who does it
mm,
marginalize? How can you mitigate it? So that's one thing you can do to take action there.
awesome. Any other questions? Things you wanted to talk about this?
Just thinking about, yeah, it's a lot to process.
It's a
I'm
lot.
thinking, what do I do differently tomorrow? What is the smallest thing that I can do? And I think for me, it's just going to be when I start to feel something or think something about someone to step back and just recognize that I'm doing it and try to see where that's coming from and to make sure that I'm really hearing that person.
Hmm. Oh, and thank you. Susan's put in the chat all of these resources so you can see them there. The bias assessment is really quick. It's like a 10-15 minute assessment, and it says you may be likely to be biased in these cognitive areas, and here are some ways to kind of to think through that. Some of the other books and webinars uh, are more set up for like organizational or team-based changes, not individual-based changes. But yeah.
Is there anything that's particularly important for agile coaches or agile servant leaders to be doing that's specific to us and our role and our influence?
I think that for agile coaches, what was that about? Puppy dogs getting into the presentation. Um, I think for agile coaches, the main thing would be us to be paying attention to your teams and what does this look like on your teams, right? Really, this comes down to whether folks are able to bring their full uh, their full self to work, right? I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but I've worked in places where my stuff would, all of my work, all of my accomplishments were kind of downgraded or ignored. And I didn't work as hard, or I did for different reasons. I found other motivations, right? Like I ended up having like a side life and that I was about my students, right? It was not about admin because they didn't care. And then I transferred to another place, Cal State San Marcos, actually, where I'm at now, who were amazed at everything they wanted me to lead. They wanted to put me in power. They were like, "These are great ideas. You have so much that you're bringing, and this is amazing." And man, if I didn't work twice as hard and twice as passionately for them, right? So I wonder in the agile sphere how much if we're not looking for uh, if we're not asking the question, are we excluding folks? Are we equitable? Is this a safe place for everyone to bring their full self? Man, we're losing out, right? And it's a diversity of perspectives that's really going to bring us further with innovation anyway. So we need even more so, right? Paula, I saw your hand.
Along that spirit of safe space, I'm going to go ahead and just stop recording since
Hmm,
we got Amy your presentation because I do want to make this a safe space for questions. So I'll go ahead and
great.
stop here.